Anytime.
Hello. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the New World Order. And you've probably heard something about this or a lot about this, and there are two pretty much categories. People that deny there's, in other words, we're working towards a New World Order, and people that are totally fanatically, in favor of it. And actually, I feel like, of course, everyone thinks what they say is correct, but anyway, I believe you'll find this to be fairly true. The New World Order, that's kind of code, and it began really right after World War II, and actually began with Eleanor Roosevelt, of all people. She was a huge fan of never having wars again, which of course is a nice thought, but literally for millions of years, thousands of years at least, mankind has had battles, and it's just a fact of nature. We're going to come into conflict with each other, and we're going to have battles. But the New World Order, starting right after World War II, and then that began the United Nations. Eleanor Roosevelt was kind of the brainchild or whatever behind the United Nations. It had been a thought, before that, before her husband died, Franklin Roosevelt. Many people had talked about it. But anyway, the United Nations was started by a convention in San Francisco. And since Eleanor Roosevelt seemed like such a nice person, the New World Order people kind of used her. They pushed her to the front, and I mean, who can get upset with something good old Eleanor Roosevelt says? But the problem is, if we look as to what exactly the New World Order is, frankly, it's what we call today, we call it global socialism. It's basically, there are no governments, no United States, no England, no United Kingdom. All the governments just become, quote, states, and you'll see that in a lot of literature now, which basically means it's liberal type literature. You'll see the word states for a country, and they try not to use the word country or anymore. And so, so the New World Order, supposedly the United Nations, the Grand United Nations, is going to be in charge of everything eventually. That's the whole plan. And who's behind this in the United States? One of the very biggest pushers of this, George H.W. Bush, and of course he's a Republican, and I'm a conservative. I would say a conservative Christian, just so you know where I'm coming from. But George H.W. Bush, the old man who's very old and everyone seems to love, as far as what he did was pretty evil, if you look into what he was doing. Now, he was a nice guy, and I'm sure he's still a nice guy, but he, in his speeches, beginning right after World War II, almost every speech, he talked about the New World Order, saying we're going to have a New World Order before long. And matter of fact, there was a montage of that on YouTube at one time, a composite of about 15 different clips taken out of different speeches of George H.W. Bush. But of course, like they do, which is pretty easy to do if you've got just a small amount of money, you can get stuff scrubbed from the internet. So you can probably find that if you work, but I don't know. There are different websites that claim they can find anything, nothing is ever lost. However, to the general public, if you put in New World Order into YouTube, you will not find this 15 little clips of George H.W. Bush. And what did he mean by New World Order? Well, just as I was talking about, he means, and he still means, the United Nations in total charge, no one having any weapons at all, no one in the United States having any weapons, no one in the world having any weapons except the United Nations. So if somebody gets out of hand, they're going to have all the weapons and they can quell anything happening. So that's why people think Americans are so nuts, because they're so, you're not taking our guns away, and there's an extremely good foundation, extremely good reason for that. Someone said, well, it's apparently a true statement, that the people of the United States have more guns than our Army does. And that sounds a little incredible. Now, but of course the Army has much larger weapons. They've got nuclear weapons if it comes to that. But anyway, the people in the United States have a whole lot more guns, and we're not giving them up. Because after the United States falls as a powerful country and they have no weapons, the socialism will just engulf America. Like it did England, United Kingdom, it engulfed them. No one in the United Kingdom, England, has any weapons. No one in France does. No one in Russia does, because the government has confiscated all the weapons. Of course, for our own good in the United States, they say, so we don't accidentally kill somebody. But you have to believe, and hopefully you will believe, that it's a really, really bad idea. Our weapons are the only stumbling block to these nuts that are pushing the New World Order. So, the New World Order means the United Nations in total control, and people say, well, the United Nations doesn't have any power. They're just some little agency no one even talks about. Well, but the point is, once all the countries fall and become under the United Nations, they will have a huge amount of power, and it will become very evident, because they'll have the weapons. And let's say there's going to be rebellions and people, well, it's basically just global socialism, and socialism, or the way they're using it today, is a polite word for communism, and that means, i.e., the type of communism they have in Red China, Mao Zedong communism, and a guy named Trotsky early in the communist movement, Trotsky communism. Those are one and the same. So that's what our brilliant, liberals, socialists, communists are working towards. Trotsky was executed by orders of Stalin, because he was kind of a threat. And by the way, those are your two basic types of communism that well, people that read, people that think, understand. You've got Stalin communism, and after the atrocities of Stalin came out, he murdered basically 20 million of his own people, not in times of war. Of course, in times of war, he used people like fodder, and he used millions and millions, had millions and millions of people killed. When the United States, in our Christian heritage, we respect individuals, and we would always go to great lengths, if possible, to save an individual. But Stalin in World War II just threw millions away. But I'm not even talking about during war. After World War II, Stalin intentionally, his lists had millions murdered, because anyone that stuck up slightly above the crowd, Stalin had murdered. In other words, if he hears somebody gave a speech at some little meeting 1,500 miles from Moscow, they would go over, take him out, and have him murdered. Send him to the Gulag archipelago, but basically they were eventually murdered. Everyone who stood up and said they were a Christian were murdered. Communism, for one thing, depends on atheism. You've got, in other words, the only thing you can worship in communism is the government. The communist government is the only thing you're allowed to worship. So if God, Jesus Christ, or whatever, if that ever comes up, you're dead in a communist country, in the United Nations, controlling the entire world, you would be dead.